It was Super Bowl Sunday, February 2nd, 2014. While most of America was getting ready to watch football, a single gunshot echoed through the night in Coppell, Texas, a quiet Dallas suburb where nothing much ever happens. A frantic 911 call brought emergency responders rushing to the River Chase apartment complex. And what they found inside one of those units would spark a mystery that still hasn't been fully solved to this day. Jonathan Cruz was born in California but grew up in Irving, Texas. And by all accounts, this was a young man who had everything going for him. When Jonathan was just a boy, he would visit his grandfather out in Montana. That's where he and his brother learned to shoot pistols. This wasn't some city kid who didn't know which end of a gun was which. Jonathan was the middle child. He had an older brother named Christian and a younger sister named Danielle, who everybody called Danny. And these three weren't just siblings, they were best friends. The kind of family where everybody actually likes each other. You know the type. They talk, they laugh, they share things. Even in his mid-20s, Jonathan still talked openly about his life with his mother, Pam. No secrets, no drama, just a good, solid, loving family. He studied history at Baylor University down in Waco and graduated in 2009. After that, he moved back to North Texas to be close to his people. And when he came home, his mama Pam gifted him a little corgi puppy. He named that dog Ulysses. By early 2014, Jonathan was 27 years old and doing well for himself. He had just landed a new position as an operations director at an urgent care clinic. Good title, good salary, the kind of job that makes your mama proud. With that new paycheck came a new chapter. For the first time in his life, Jonathan moved into his own apartment, his very own place. No roommates, no family down the hall, just him and Ulysses starting fresh. He had only been living there for about a week when he died. The boy was just getting started. New job, new apartment, new relationship. He was looking toward the future, talking about finding a wife someday, building a life. And then Super Bowl Sunday happened. But before we get to that night, we need to talk about the new girlfriend, because that's where this story takes a turn. Her name was Brenda Lazaro. She was a few years younger than him and worked as an instructor at the Clay Wee Shaolin Martial Arts School for a man named Henry Sue. That's actually where she met Jonathan's little sister, Danny. The two of them became close friends, best friends even. So when Jonathan decided he wanted to ask Brenda out, he did the respectful thing. He went to his sister first and asked permission. Danny gave her blessing, and just like that, they were a couple. Now the relationship moved fast, real fast. By February 2014, they had only been together about 3 months. But already Brenda was saying she was in love. They were talking about marriage, children, building a life together, the whole future mapped out after just a few weeks of dating. And Jonathan, according to everyone who knew him, was always looking for his future wife. He wasn't the type to play games or waste time. So on paper, this seemed like it could be the real thing. But paper doesn't tell you everything, and sometimes the things that look perfect on the surface are rotting underneath. Shortly after the relationship started, Jonathan and Brenda went out for dinner with two of his closest friends, Jacob and Emily. Now those two were also newly dating at the time. So it was a double date situation. Two couples at a nice Chinese restaurant. Should have been a fun evening. Good food, good conversation, getting to know each other. But Brenda was noticeably quiet the entire night, barely said a word, just sat there while everyone else talked and laughed and enjoyed themselves. At first, Jacob and Emily figured she was just shy. Some people are introverts. They take time to warm up in social situations. No big deal. But that wasn't it at all. Brenda wasn't quiet because she was shy. She was quiet because she was furious. Why? What could possibly have made her so angry on a nice dinner date? Because when they first arrived at the restaurant, Jonathan hugged Emily, hello. That's it, a hug. A friendly greeting between two people who had known each other for years. The kind of hug you give your friend when you see them. Nothing romantic, nothing inappropriate, just a simple, friendly gesture that happens millions of times a day all over the world. Jonathan and Emily had never dated, never had romantic feelings for each other, never even considered it. They were just close friends. That's all they ever were. But Brenda could not handle it, could not accept it, could not get over it. And I mean, she really could not let it go. Brenda brought it up over and over and over again, obsessively, like it was the worst betrayal imaginable. During Christmas time, Jonathan went on a family trip to Europe. While he was gone, thousands of miles away, trying to enjoy a vacation with his loved ones, he and Brenda had multiple all-night arguments over text about Emily, about the hug, about his friendship with her, about why he wouldn't just cut Emily out of his life completely. The jealousy was constant, relentless, exhausting. Now, I've been around long enough to know that jealousy in a relationship is a red flag. A little bit is normal. We're all human. But when someone cannot let go of a friendly hug 3 months later, when they're starting fights about it in the middle of the night while you're on vacation with your family, that's not normal jealousy. That's something else entirely. On February 1st, 2014, the day before Jonathan died, he sent his sister Danny a series of text messages. And these messages are important because they show exactly where his head was at. Jonathan laid out 4 options for how he could handle the situation with Brenda. Option 1, fight it and try to make things work. But he admitted that would probably never happen. Option 2, choose Brenda and give up his friends. Option 3, refuse to give up either one and wait to see if Brenda ends things herself. Option 4, end it with Brenda himself. Jonathan told his sister that the first 3 options all had a strong likelihood of ending the relationship anyway. So he figured breaking up on his own terms would limit the damage, contain the fallout, make it as clean as possible. He apologized to Danny. He knew breaking up with her close friend was going to put her in an awkward position, might even damage their friendship, but his mind was made up. He also said something else that stuck with me. He told someone close to him that with Brenda, there's a level of crazy and I'm not sure how deep it runs. I need to know before I can fully commit. He wasn't willing to give up everything he had worked for and everyone he loved for some girl he had been dating 10 weeks. That's not the mindset of someone about to take his own life. That's the mindset of someone making practical decisions about his future. So that was the plan. End the relationship. Move on. Get back to building his life. The very next day, he was dead. It was 11:30 at night on Super Bowl Sunday, February 2nd, 2014. While most of America was recovering from the game, Brenda Lazaro called 911 in a complete panic, sobbing, hyperventilating, screaming, barely able to get words out. She told the dispatcher that Jonathan had been shot, that he did it to himself. But here's the first problem. She couldn't tell him where she was. Now, Brenda spent a good chunk of her childhood in Mexico, so English wasn't her first language. She struggled with verb tenses, but still, she was at her boyfriend's apartment. The man she supposedly loved, the man she was talking about marrying, and she couldn't give the dispatcher the address, couldn't remember the name of the apartment complex. She was sitting in her car in the parking lot and had no idea where to tell them to send help. For nearly 3 minutes, the dispatcher is trying to figure out the location, asking questions, getting nowhere, while Brenda screams and cries. Then the dispatcher asks a very important question. Did he shoot himself on purpose? Brenda shouts no. Then a few seconds later, she changes her answer. Yeah, he did it on purpose. Wait. What? First it wasn't intentional, then it was. Which is it? How do you get that confused? Either you watched someone deliberately shoot themselves or you didn't. That's not something you mix up. She told the dispatcher they were just having a discussion, that Jonathan said something to her and she didn't believe him, that he said he was going to be the hero. Be the hero? What does that even mean? She never explained it, just threw that phrase out there like it made sense. 6 minutes into the call, the dispatcher tells Brenda she needs to go outside and knock on a neighbor's door to get the address. It took her 8 full minutes to finally find someone who could confirm she was at the River Chase Apartments. 8 minutes to get basic location information. The dispatcher told her to stay outside after that. Wait for the paramedics. Don't go back in. But Brenda went right back into that bedroom anyway and declared again that Jonathan was dead. Now, the dispatcher assumed Brenda had walked in and discovered Jonathan after the shot, that she found him. But that's not what Brenda was claiming. She said she was there when it happened, that she witnessed the whole thing. Paramedics arrived around 11:40 at night. They found Jonathan Cruz lying in his bed, covers pulled up to his waist, nice and neat, gunshot wound to the left side of his chest. He was already gone. They estimated he had been dead for about 30 minutes by the time they got there. His gun, a Sig Sauer 9mm, was sitting right there on the blanket next to him, to his left side. And his phone was found damaged and shoved down between the mattress and the box spring. Now here's where it gets real interesting. Despite what Brenda told the dispatcher, police investigated this as a possible homicide from the very beginning. They secured paper bags over Jonathan's hands to preserve evidence, took photographs of the entire apartment, ran gunshot residue tests on both Jonathan and Brenda. The results? Jonathan had residue on the tops of a few fingers on his right hand, but nothing on his palm and nothing at all on his left hand. Keep in mind, this man was right-handed. Brenda, she had gunpowder residue on both palms, on the backs of both hands, and all over her sweater. Let me say that one more time for the people who might have missed it. The girlfriend was covered in gunpowder. The dead man barely had any on him. Make that make sense. They also found the magazine from the gun sitting in Jonathan's tie drawer. Not in the gun, where it belonged. Across the room, in a completely different drawer, mixed in with his neckties. No fingerprints were found on the gun or the magazine. No DNA evidence to indicate who had been holding that weapon when it went off. Nothing conclusive either way. Brenda was questioned at the scene that night and then again at the police station for several hours. Her story stayed consistent, but it was a strange one. She said they had been arguing on and off all day. The central issue? A woman named Emily, one of Jonathan's closest friends. Brenda was not comfortable with their relationship, and Jonathan refused to push Emily out of his life. But according to Brenda, they had worked through the argument that night, made up, watched some TV, ordered Chinese takeaway around 8 o'clock, everything was fine. Then later, Jonathan brought the argument back up again. Brenda said she went to the bathroom to get away from it. When she came out, she sat down on the floor at the foot of the bed and checked her phone. She said Jonathan said a lot of nice and sweet things to her, romantic things, loving things. Then he told her to cover her ears. Cover her ears. Much later, Brenda told Jonathan's mother, Pam, that his final words were, "Baby, I love you so much. You are my world, and I will prove it to you." Then bang, gunshot, dead. That's her story, her version of events. Does any of that make sense to you? Because I have been doing this a long time, and it sure doesn't make sense to me. Now let me tell you a little bit more about Brenda Lazaro, because context matters, and this context matters a lot. Brenda was born in Texas but moved to Mexico when she was about 5 years old. That's where her parents were from. When she was a teenager, the family moved back to the United States and settled in Irving, Texas. Her father worked installing solar panels. By most accounts, Brenda had a rough upbringing, unhappy home life, difficult childhood, and I don't say that to be mean. Lots of people have tough beginnings and turn out just fine. But here's the thing that really caught my attention. Brenda had a history of telling stories. And I don't mean little white lies or harmless exaggerations. I mean big, dramatic, hard to verify tales that seemed almost too wild to be true. She told people she witnessed a murder while she was in Mexico. But the details of that story changed depending on who she was talking to. Different versions for different audiences. One of Brenda's best friends recounted that Brenda claimed she had been kidnapped along with another girl, and she was only set free after the other girl was killed. That's quite a story. The kind of story that would traumatize someone for life. The kind of story you would think would stay consistent in the retelling. In high school, Brenda regularly told her friends she was pregnant, multiple times, but she never gave birth, never had a baby, just kept telling people she was expecting, and then nothing ever came of it. Now, I'm not saying people who tell stories are automatically guilty of terrible things, but when someone has a pattern of creating dramatic narratives that may or may not be true, you have to keep that in mind when evaluating their testimony. After high school, Brenda went on to earn a Spanish degree from the University of Texas at Austin. Good school. She worked as a substitute teacher and started teaching evening classes at the Wu Yi Martial Arts School. That's where she became close friends with Danny Cruz. That's how she ended up in Jonathan's orbit. Now let's go back to the day Jonathan died. February 2nd, 2014, Super Bowl Sunday. Late in the morning, Jacob and Emily stopped by Jonathan's new apartment for a visit. He had just moved in a week before and wanted to show his closest friends around. Give them the tour. Let them see his new place. And the tour included his guns. Jacob specifically remembered that the gun which would later kill Jonathan was stored in its own spot in the dresser. Jonathan was very particular about how he kept his firearms. And Jacob recalled that Jonathan kept this gun ready to go. Magazine in, round chambered. That's how he always stored it, ready for use if he ever needed it. But when police found the gun that night, the magazine was not in the weapon. It was sitting in Jonathan's tie drawer, a completely different drawer. Separate from the gun, how did that happen? If Jonathan shot himself, why would the magazine be across the room in his ties? That doesn't make any sense. You don't take the magazine out and put it in a drawer before you shoot yourself. That's not how it works. But if someone else shot him, someone who didn't know there was still a round in the chamber, someone who removed the magazine thinking that would make the gun safe, that would explain it. That same day, February 2nd, Jonathan told Jacob and Emily that he was going to end things with Brenda. He had made his decision. When Emily found out that she was the central issue in all these arguments, she offered to step back from the friendship. Just remove herself from the equation. Let Jonathan keep his relationship, and she would fade into the background. Jonathan said absolutely not. He refused. He would not cut his closest friends out of his life for a woman he had only been dating for 3 months. That was not a compromise he was willing to make. He told his friends he was packing Brenda's bag and cleaning her things out of his apartment. He was done. Then that night, at 10:52, Emily received a text message from Jonathan's phone. It said, "I want to die." 40 minutes later, Brenda called 911 in hysterics. Now, I want you to think about that timeline for a moment. Jonathan tells his best friends he is ending the relationship. That very same night, a text message is sent from his phone to Emily saying, "I want to die." Then he's dead. Either Jonathan had a complete change of heart and decided to take his own life after announcing he was breaking up with Brenda, or somebody else sent that text message from his phone. Officers interviewed Brenda for hours on the night Jonathan died. They questioned her again in the days that followed. When they executed a search warrant the next day, the police investigators stated clearly that they suspected Jonathan's death was a homicide. They referred to the gun found at the scene as a murder weapon. But Brenda Lazaro was never charged. Why not? Because the autopsy muddied everything up. When the Dallas County Medical Examiner completed the autopsy, they listed the manner of death as undetermined. Not suicide, not homicide, undetermined. They concluded that the gunshot wound could have been self-inflicted. The only witness, Brenda, insisted it was suicide, and there was gunpowder residue on a few fingers of the deceased's dominant hand. So technically, it was possible. But there was another scenario that was equally plausible. Maybe Jonathan was shot while he was asleep. Maybe he woke up just in time to reach for the gun as it went off. That could explain how a small amount of residue ended up on his fingers without being all over his hands. Toxicology came back clean. No drugs in his system. No alcohol. Nothing that would have made him act out of character or impaired his judgment. The Coppell Police Department determined that they did not have enough evidence to prove or disprove the homicide theory. So despite their lingering suspicions, the murder investigation did not continue. The case went cold, but Jonathan's family was not about to let this go. Not for 1 second. See, they knew their son. They knew their brother. This was a young man who grew up around guns, who competed in shooting tournaments, who was described by his family as fanatical about gun safety. He knew firearms inside and out, could tell if a weapon was loaded just by picking it up. There is no way, they believed, that Jonathan would have shot himself. Not like this, not under these circumstances. And then there was the matter of the magazine. It was out of the gun, sitting in a drawer across the room. That meant whoever pulled the trigger might not have known there was still a round in the chamber. Jonathan would have known. He always knew. That was basic gun safety that had been drilled into him since childhood. But Brenda, she might not have realized the gun was still loaded. She might have thought removing the magazine made it safe. When the police investigation stalled out, the Cruz family turned to a private investigator, a woman named Sheila Wysocki. And let me tell you, this woman does not play around. She had already made a name for herself working multiple high-profile murder cases. She knew what she was doing. One of the first things Sheila did was obtain Jonathan's medical records. What she found supported everything the family already believed. Jonathan had no history of depression. He had never been prescribed antidepressants. He wasn't taking any medications that could cause adverse side effects or mood changes. There was nothing in his medical history to suggest he was suicidal. Nothing at all. Sheila reviewed all the police reports and documentation. She interviewed new witnesses. She re-interviewed old ones. She even went so far as to go undercover at the martial arts school where Brenda worked. That's how serious she was about getting to the truth. After her thorough investigation, Sheila reached a conclusion. Jonathan Cruz could not have shot himself, and here's why. His medical records showed an injury to his right shoulder, an injury he had seen a doctor about just 2 days before he died. The injury restricted his movement and caused pain whenever he stretched too far. If he pushed it too hard, it would be excruciating. Sheila determined that the angle of the gunshot wound would have been extremely difficult for Jonathan to achieve with that shoulder injury. Awkward, painful, maybe even impossible. She said he couldn't have done that angle without breaking his wrist. Think about that. To shoot himself on the left side of his chest with a right shoulder injury that limited his range of motion, he would have had to contort his body in an unnatural and agonizing way. Why would anyone do that? If you were determined to end your life, why would you choose the most difficult and painful method possible? And then there was the timeline problem. Remember that neighbor whose door Brenda eventually knocked on during the 911 call to get the address? That neighbor told police she heard the gunshot, and she believed at least 20 minutes passed between the gunshot and when Brenda came knocking on her door. Actually, she told police that night it was closer to 45 minutes. The paramedics estimated Jonathan had been dead for about 30 minutes when they arrived at 11:40. That timeline roughly matched what the neighbor described. So what was Brenda doing for all that time between the gunshot and the emergency call? If your boyfriend just shot himself right in front of you, wouldn't you call 911 immediately? Wouldn't every second feel like an eternity? Why the delay? As the second anniversary of Jonathan's death approached, his parents, Pam and John Cruz, started talking about filing a civil lawsuit against Brenda, wrongful death. They figured that even if they couldn't get criminal charges, maybe they could at least get some answers, uncover more evidence, force Brenda to explain herself under oath. Civil cases have a lower burden of proof than criminal cases. The family's lawyers wouldn't have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. They would only have to show that a preponderance of the evidence indicated Brenda was responsible. Basically, the jury would be asked whether it was more likely than not that Brenda killed Jonathan. It took years to get to trial, but in 2022, they finally moved forward with the civil case. Sheila Wysocki had developed a theory of what happened that night, a theory that would be presented with supporting evidence at trial. They believed Jonathan did tell Brenda he wanted to break up, and they fought about it. Based on text messages uncovered during the investigation, the team knew from Jonathan's own words that when he got into a heated argument, his response was to disengage and go to sleep, remove himself from the conflict. They believe that's exactly what he did that night. He told Brenda it was over. They argued, and then Jonathan went to bed. Once Jonathan was asleep, they proposed that Brenda took his phone and sent that text message to Emily, "I want to die," creating evidence of suicidal thoughts. Then she smashed the phone to hide what she had done. That would explain why it was found damaged and shoved between the mattress and box spring. Then she got Jonathan's gun from the dresser, aimed it at his heart, and pulled the trigger. A retired Houston police detective named Daryl Robertson testified at the trial. He stated that Jonathan Cruz would have had to contort his body in an unnatural way to inflict a wound on the left side of his chest. And with the shoulder injury Jonathan had seen a doctor about just 2 days earlier, Robertson said it defies common sense that Jonathan would have pushed through that kind of shoulder pain to put the barrel of the gun where he was shot. Robertson also pointed to the gunshot residue found all over Brenda, on her palms, on the backs of her hands, on her sweater. Far more residue was found on her than on Jonathan. But Brenda's defense team had arguments of their own. They claimed the residue testing was misleading. Crime scene investigators had only tested the backs of Jonathan's hands. They never tested his palms or his clothing like they did with Brenda. Of course, she had more gunpowder residue on her. They tested her more thoroughly. Brenda's attorney, Andrew Gee, suggested that the residue got on her when she tried to cover the bullet wound to stop the bleeding. That explained why it was on her hands and sweater. He also challenged the motive. If Jonathan had really broken up with Brenda that night, why did they order Chinese food together at 8 o'clock? Why was she still in the apartment past 11? Why was Jonathan going to bed with her still there if he wanted her gone? Those aren't the actions of a couple in the middle of a breakup, the defense argued. And then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Brenda Kelly, her married name now, took the witness stand. Jonathan's family held their breath. They had heard different versions of this story over the years from different sources. The details kept changing depending on who Brenda was talking to. She told Danny that Jonathan was standing when he pulled the trigger. She told Henry Sue from the martial arts school that she was in the living room when the gun went off. She told co-workers at the school that she was in the bathroom when it happened. Standing, living room, bathroom, 3 different versions, 3 different stories. So, which one would she tell under oath? What was the real story? None of them. Brenda was asked dozens of questions by the Cruz family's attorney over the course of 90 minutes, and she did not answer a single one. Not one. She invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination to every single question. For 90 minutes straight, just sat there and refused to say anything. Now, the Fifth Amendment is an important right. I'm not disputing that. But I want you to think about this for a moment. If you watched your boyfriend take his own life and you had nothing to hide, would you sit on that witness stand and refuse to answer any questions? If you were innocent, wouldn't you want to tell your side of the story? Wouldn't you want to explain what happened? 90 minutes of silence. The jury didn't think that looked innocent either. 6 people deliberated for 2.5 hours before reaching a verdict, and it was unanimous. In a civil case, you only need 5 out of 6 votes. They gave all 6. Thomas Shaw, the lawyer for the Cruz family, had asked the jury to award more than $129 million in damages. The jury came back with $206 million. You don't hand out that kind of money if you believe it was a suicide. You don't unanimously agree to a $200 million verdict if you think the girlfriend is telling the truth. That jury heard all the evidence. They weighed both sides, and they decided Brenda was responsible for Jonathan's death. But here's the heartbreaking part. Despite that civil verdict, Brenda has never faced criminal charges for the murder of Jonathan Cruz. She maintains her innocence to this day, and the official manner of death is still listed as undetermined. The private investigation undertaken by Sheila Wysocki and the Cruz family turned up evidence that was handed over to the Coppell Police Department. But as of now, they have not reopened the criminal investigation. Jonathan Cruz was 27 years old. He had a new job he was proud of, a new apartment he had just moved into, a little corgi named Ulysses who was his constant companion. He was looking for his future wife, building a life, making plans, and somebody took all of that away from him. His family believes they know who did it. A civil jury agreed with them. But real justice, criminal justice, still hasn't come. And honestly, that's the part that keeps me up at night. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Grandma appreciates each and every one of you. If this case made you think, drop a comment below and tell me what you believe really happened in that apartment on Super Bowl Sunday. Stay safe out there. Trust your gut. And remember, when something doesn't add up, keep asking questions. Keep pushing for the truth, because sometimes the people who are supposed to find justice need a little help from the rest of us.